This is an ad by BetterHelp. What are your self-care non-negotiables? It's hard to make time for the things that keep you healthy. But being consistent with self-care is like working a muscle. And when life gets crazy, that muscle keeps you strong. Therapy is the ultimate self-care. And BetterHelp makes it easy to get started with affordable online sessions you can do from anywhere. Never skip therapy day with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com today to get 10% off your first month.
We acknowledge the traditional owners of country throughout Australia and recognise their continuing connection to land, waters and culture. We pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging. Hello there and welcome back to another episode of This Song Is Yours. I'm your host Simon Fink and I'm super excited to share this episode with you today. Legendary band Crowded House have released their new record Gravity Stairs, and we have OG member Nick Seymour joining us on the pod to chat all about it. Now, I feel like it's almost silly to give an introduction to one of the world's most beloved bands. They are an ARIA, Brit and MTV award-winning Australian band who have won hearts and fans world over with their stunning songwriting on display in every track that they put out. Everyone and their mum knows songs like Don't Dream It's Over and Something So Strong. And last week, they released their brilliant 8th studio record, which is titled Gravity Stairs. And it's the second record under the new lineup, which includes producer Mitchell Froome and Liam and Elroy Finn. Now, in today's episode, we're talking to Nick Seymour about the songwriting of this record and how they managed to come together from every corner of the globe to build this brilliant record. We'll discuss the dynamic that this new lineup brings, the evolution of the band's sound, and how new blood maybe introduce some new elements into this much-beloved band. We'll also talk about their forthcoming Australian tour, which in full transparency was not announced at the time of us recording this. Now, for all details on said tour and how you can purchase Gravity Stairs, as well as more information about Crowded House and more information about this very podcast, be sure to check out today's show notes. We also want to say a massive thank you to a different Nick for his help with today's episode. Now, don't forget to subscribe to this podcast if you haven't already, but let's not waste any more time. Here is our conversation with the brilliant Nick Seymour from Crowded House. Please welcome to This Song Is Yours, Nick Seymour from Crowded House. Nick, hello. How are you going?
I'm feeling pretty well, thank you. I'm 2 coffees into the day, and I think I'd better leave it at that. It's always tempting to have a third, when you're doing, particularly if you're trying to sort of talk about your music and stuff. You kind of think you need something to stimulate. But anyway, it's early morning here in the west of Ireland.
You are having a chat with us from Ireland, so I do appreciate that. It's funny you mentioned that. We actually recently spoke to the indie band Group Love, who almost said an exactly similar sentiment of the 2 coffees is good to get you through the morning, but once you hit that third, it's kind of all bets are off. Anything can happen after that.
Then you're suddenly drawing breath through your teeth. If after the third one you're punctuating things with a... And that's, I sort of know at this age that that's okay. I don't want to do that, so I'm not going to have the third. It's very tempting, but I'm not going to do it.
Well, look, I can appreciate that. And again, thank you for joining us this morning. It is an incredibly exciting time. There's a brand new Crowded House record, Gravity Stairs, coming out later this week. Firstly, congrats on this beautiful record. How are you feeling with it now coming out?
Oh, you've heard it?
I have, yes.
Great. And what are your impressions so far? Have you gotten through the whole thing, or you've listened a couple of times, and are there any standout kind of titles?
We can jump right into it, of course. I what was it? The last track, Night Song, I thought was...
Night Song, my God.
Incredible kind of... Yeah, the arrangement and kind of the way that it's kind of all over the place but held together in this beautifully almost lucid kind of way. What else was there? There was...
Well, see, what the beauty of that song, and it's a great album ender in the sense that it is it is about sleep. I mean, it clearly it's about the song that goes around and around and around in your head when you're trying to wind down and relax every muscle in your body, just sink into the mattress and the pillow, to just be able to just nod off, even when you're overtired. And particularly when you've come out of the studio and you've listened to a song, 150 times or so as you're working on it, you've got to try and wind down to actually be able to sleep. And that's what I love about Night Song, is that it is about that twilight existence between sleep and consciousness, and it goes from one section to another that have entire, like it's a song with three parts that have nothing to do with each other particularly, and it was recorded that way. We are mostly a linear recording band where we have an arrangement with an intro and movements that require an arrangement across a period of time to actually perform it together in a room. That song was the culmination of jiggery-pokery between various edits of music that we had, and so the arrangement you're hearing in that song is as disjointed as the lyric that defines it. And I love it for that sake. I couldn't work out. I couldn't believe that we got it together when it came together. It's like a beautiful triptych painting.
It's absolutely stunning, and it was something that kind of took me by surprise. Am I right? Did I hear or read somewhere it was inspired by maybe the ramblings of an incoherent person outside of a window or a hotel room, or maybe a gentleman that needed one or two coffees?
Yeah. Yeah. So it was, Neil was staying in an Airbnb in Los Angeles, and there was a guy in the laneway behind his bedroom ranting in the middle of the night, and Neil just thought it was just so, and with the sound, Neil opened the window, and with the sound of the hum, the deep resonant bass hum of a dense city, it just sounded like a nightscape, a soundscape of nighttime that defined that point where he couldn't get to sleep, and he really wanted to hear what the man was saying. So, and then I think he just upped with his phone and recorded what the guy was saying, and that is the voice that you're hearing on. And Neil's actually tried to find him, but he ended up asking I think it was a small hotel he was staying at, not an Airbnb, and he asked the people if they knew who the guy was that was in the laneway on this particular night. It just ended up becoming a pursuit that fell on itself. It didn't get anywhere. But anyway, he's out there somewhere.
I absolutely love that. It's kind of like, it adds another level of mystery to the song, which is, as he said, a beautiful, beautiful kind of album closer. One thing that kind of struck me with this and some of the other sonics on the record, this is the second iteration. It's the second album of the third iteration of the band. It's yourself and Neil, and then the last album, Dreams Are Waiting, and then this record includes Mitchell Froome and Elroy and Liam Finn. With this lineup, do you find those three newer members, that they're pushing the envelope of the sound of the band? Is it something that you would have maybe done without them being included?
No, we wouldn't have done it without them being included, no. I think it was an obvious... when Neil came up with the idea of asking Elroy and Liam to join the band, it just seemed obvious to me. It wasn't something that I thought might happen, like being able to predict what's going to happen next with this band. I think Neil had decided in his head that he was probably going to record more solo albums, and had recorded an album with Liam. They'd made an album together, and then he joined Fleetwood Mac for a year and a half or so of that touring period, and I think that restored his faith in the love that he has for touring with an ensemble that can, that sort of opened up his parameters to musical styles that he hadn't played or wouldn't think of playing as a soloist, and then realised that he loved jamming again. And I think he recognised that when he sat down with his boys, they were the coolest jam band ever, best party band. So the idea just it fell into place beautifully. It was the right time for Elroy and Liam as well, who had tried many different iterations, to use your word, and I think that's exact same sentiment when he asked Mitchell to join the band. Mitchell had produced so many albums and has just been in a studio environment for so many years, and he's a really good jamming musician. And you don't have that opportunity when you're you have the structure of projects that people were going to him with as a producer, and there's a formality that, and if jamming comes out of that in the studio, if the studio environment can be free enough to allow for jamming, then well and good. But I think Mitchell was like, well, why not? I love jamming, and I haven't been in a band since I was a young adult, and we all got together and tried it out, and it was like being an adolescent again. Just making really loud noises and playing with abstracts and just feeling that freedom and. We hadn't felt that for a while, Neil and I, in a band, that freedom that we used to feel with the lineup with Paul Hester, which was the initial reason that we realised or discovered our chemistry. And when we rediscovered a chemistry that was in part of Liam and Elroy's DNA, and obviously the chemistry we had with Mitchell Froome from having worked with him for the first 3 albums, and it was a no-brainer. We thought let's ride this pony.
I feel like that almost is kind of audibly there in this record, in Gravity Stairs. There's a jam element to it almost. There's a lightness to some of the tracks, and these sonics that I kind of want to say. There's nothing that's too held down, if that kind of makes sense. I don't know if that is. Yeah.
There's a lightness of being, I think, is the zone. I think ultimately we when we made selections for what we were going to work on as songs, it was a case of defining which take was of whatever we were working on was better than another take, which is very, when you're sitting in a studio in a control room together and you've played a song 3 or 4 times, and then you're listening back to the 3 or 4 different versions, and you decide that version 3 was the best of take 3 was the best. And then you try to define, well, what is better about take 3 than take 2? Because in the digital age, when we're looking at symmetry and sound waves visually on a screen and trying to make analysis of whether we're all playing together in the same sense of surge or retard in music. You're looking at the screen seeing, well, there's a bass drum wave, there's the front of the bass drum hit. The bass note seems to be behind that. Should we move it up onto the so that it sounds so much more part of the the time signature, or should we? And we ended up not analyzing any of those issues. It was just purely audio, and it was magical for me because I've become so damned anal of looking at the screen and defining music almost by how it appears in this digital realm as actual images on an edit page, and there doesn't seem to be any of that on this record. It is very, very the lightness of the being, of the moment, and the spell that the take 3 had that take 2 didn't, and it's just abstract. But the whole album is like that, which is fantastic. And there's not many albums coming out these days that are like that. I guess it's very old-fashioned, but I think it's a thing that people really respond to, in why music is so abstract and why it has an integrity that is untouchable. If you hear the spell, when you listen to that music, you're suddenly drawn into this moment where you're just listening to the thing as a whole, and it's bringing you somewhere else in a dreamy way.
Did you find that, I know that this record was recorded, I believe, across a few different continents. Was it difficult to be able to maintain that kind of, that quality of it if you're having to kind of, you're jumping around recording in different spots?
Yeah. Yes, it is always, there is always a threshold that you have to break through whenever you try to industrially record, the magic of a band. There's always the threshold, but we're all experienced enough to actually break through or know what we need in a room to make it comfortable for us to actually regress into that kind of childish, dreamlike state. But because we did record. We started in Australia at the start of a tour. We put aside a week of recording in a studio in Byron Bay before we started on this Australian tour. Then on the next tour, I think then the end of that tour, we finished in New Zealand. So we went into Neil's studio in Auckland, and again had a week, maybe 10 days. And then we were doing a tour of the United States. So we decided to write in a week or 10 days or a week of recording in Los Angeles, before the tour started, or it might have been at the end of that American tour. I can't quite remember, but it was all relative to where we were all actually meeting together for the ongoing progressive dinner, if you will, because we do live all over the world, and we get together to actually, to tour, to play gigs. So it makes sense that if we are all together and we've got this, schedule, we've got our gear, we might as well just put some time aside to record. And that's how we made this album. We ended up in France at the end of it, a European tour, and actually, yeah. It's slightly, we were in Europe, and so we ended up going to a studio in France, and that was the last session we did. And then there's a lot of remote recording where when we're back home, we all have, the privilege of having a nice studio space, workroom, and the ability to share to file share. So there's a lot of, ideas that happen, like backing vocals or ambient sort of clusters of, sound effects, things like that might help a song. And we can throw that into the fray as well. So, yeah, it's a culmination of all being together, recording linearly, and then going our separate ways and being able to file share ideas of, backing vocals, harmonies, things like that.
How are you we've had varying quite a degree of different answers when it comes to this in terms of recording and file sharing, recording separately and alone. How do you kind of fare with that? Is it something you enjoy? Is it something that it's just part of the process, or is it something that you've come to kind of learn to it's just what has to be done?
I think it's I think we all benefit from the fact that that an idea that you might have had when you were in the studio recording the back end, the basic track, like the rhythm section, and then the guts of the song all together, and then you had an idea for a backing vocal or a keyboard idea or a horn line or whatever, but to actually, if you were to bring it up in the studio at the time, it might actually be shut down before it had even been tried, because the timing wasn't right to actually bring everybody in the room to the same place. I've got this idea for a string part or whatever. You think to yourself, you make a note, and then you think, I'll try that at home. And then you can investigate it more thoroughly. You can spend a day, maybe 2 days, working this thing out and resolving it to a point where the idea could be tabled and taken more seriously by the other members of the band, as opposed to it being a flippant sort of, oh, no, I don't think this song needs strings, or, when you're in the room together. We all have the benefit of working stuff out in our workrooms and not being too precious or being under the pressure of the dynamic of the room, whether, it's people are hungry or, like ideas can be shut down in a really flippant way, that when you're actually in the studio trying to get things done within a certain time frame, because it's costing you, $1,500 to $2,000 a day to rent the room, so having the benefit of that remote recording is something I think we all really enjoy now, and are quite good at manipulating our gear. We're all pretty competent and confident with our studio setups.
I love that. I think that it is obviously one thing that I felt was progressed along very quickly by the pandemic, but it's obviously come out with a number of silver linings in terms of something like that, where it's good for creativity and being able to create art in a different kind of way.
Well, one thing about the pandemic that was a positive was the benefits and merit of remote work, that people could define a structure in a much more controlled environment than the shared space. I think that particularly in music, I think that really people benefited from recognizing that isolated work is it certainly worked for Crowded House, that's for sure. I mean, we'd never really. We had this almost a rule that it was, if it didn't happen within the group, within a room at a certain time, then it wasn't going to happen at all. And we'd sort of shelve things or just put things away if they weren't working in the studio and didn't move. It was a pressure that we had on ourselves. I think that, when you're in a band, you really draw from your limitations, and you kind of set yourself boundaries in that regard that are what you think is your muse and where you think you're best served. And because of the COVID separated remote nature of you being unable to commune, legally. I mean, all the studios closed down. We were in the middle of recording a session for Dreamers Are Waiting, our last album, and we were in Los Angeles, and COVID happened, and all the studios closed down, and we were all in Los Angeles, and I suddenly realized, well, what's going to happen next? Is are they going to close the airports? And I was staying in an Airbnb, and realized I've got to get out of here. It was every man for himself. And I drove out to the airport and just got a plane to Los Angeles, back to Dublin, and then even even trying to get from Dublin to Sligo, where I live, that was suddenly tricky as well. In that there were roadblocks, and oh my God, extraordinary. It's amazing how we've put it behind us and we've moved on. And if you remember how bizarre that period was, extraordinary what measures we enforced on ourselves, and our boundaries and blah, blah, blah.
It definitely was, yes, a wild time in terms of all that kind of stuff. And again, some silver linings that have come out of it musically, creatively. I think we've got a number of lockdown albums and technologies to help us create. One thing I wanted to discuss was, and I didn't realize this before researching for this interview, I've been a Crowded House fan since I was a young boy in the early to mid-90s. I didn't know that you do all the artwork for all the albums.
Oh, okay. Right. Yeah, we are strictly a very DIY band.
I had no idea. That's fantastic.
Well, look, I think that our DIY nature. Where are you talking from?
What do you mean?
Where are you? Are you based in Australia?
Oh, yes, we're in Adelaide.
In Adelaide, yeah. So, are you familiar with DIY? Do it yourself. I mean, it's a term that everybody uses over here to describe being able to just draw from your own resources. And Crowded House has always done that, simply because the minute you engage with committee, the idea gets lost. And we've always been a DIY band. From day one, it was like, we've got an idea for such and such. Well, who's going to take care of that? Paul, do you mind doing that? Or no, Neil puts his hand, he's going to do it. And with the album artwork, it was, I had an art training. I went to art school, blah, blah, blah. It was sort of something that I just kind of fell into. I'd always wanted to design record sleeves. It was part of the remit of an adolescent musings, when you're sort of, drawing on your own clothes or carving, drawing on your school bag or, I've always done that stuff as an adolescent to my twilight years now as a 65-year-old. I've always been a maker of visual stuff, whether it's working on the house or, customizing my car even, I've always done it. And this album cover is kind of a homage to that age of, the album cover is a homage to Klaus Voormann's illustration for the Revolver album cover for the Beatles. When I was a kid, that record cover encapsulated all of the pen and ink drawing and musings that were sort of fashionable in the kind of psychedelic aesthetic of, say, 1972 to 1975 before the punk rock aesthetic hit. And I wanted to try and design a cover that that when I put pen to paper or paint to canvas or whatever, it had to make sense to me as to finding that muse to then show it to the band members and say, this is my idea for a record sleeve, what do you think? And because we were touring so much, what I did with this record sleeve was I had 6 pieces of A4, cartridge paper, and I decided that would fit into my suitcase in a folder, and I could work on it in the hotel room. In my hotel room, just dealing with the A4 size, and then put it together as a collage at the end, so that it was one large square image with a detailed drawing of each member of the band. And if you zoom in on it, you can see each member of the band's has a characterization in either the landscape that is within their hair, which is very much like the Revolver cover that Klaus Voormann did. Neil is struggling with reeds in a boat, and then there's a shot of the open surf. There's a section where his hair goes over the top of his head. There's a lifeboat that is about to be completely swamped by a really big wave, and these poor navigators are going to be completely swamped when they're trying to actually escape. It's a lifeboat that's come off the side of a ship, as the ship is going down. These people are trying to escape, and they're about to go under this massive wave, and that defined. I thought was a great definition of Neil's. The moment that he's trying to find his way into a song, and define the song, and then the other side of his head is this entanglement in reeds, where he's actually come ashore, but he's in this sort of mangroves, and finding his way through the reeds to get to the point where this song makes sense. Elroy's is a waterfall cascading over through rocks, finding its way through the sensitivity of life. Liam's is a headdress that's something like what Sun Ra would have worn, or some sort of tribal headdress that is far bigger than the diminutive figure that he actually is, but he has more front than Myers, as they say in Melbourne. Mitchell's is a welcoming cat, a good luck cat that is your guard, your guard and guide, and that's inside his little brain. I didn't know what to put. I didn't know how to draw myself, so I'm sort of like an afterthought in the bottom left hand side of the. In fact, if you looked at it, you probably wouldn't recognise who's that guy. But anyway. That sort of explains the record sleeve.
It is an incredible piece of art, and I think we were lucky enough, obviously, and for some people who might not be aware, like we get sent a lot of PR stuff, and so we get sent the high quality version of the cover art. And it was when I kind of opened that file and having a look, I was like, this is very dense, very more than meets the eye. So it's very impressive. So thank you very much for sharing that with us.
Do you know, also it was one of those things that when you're on the road and you're trying, you've finished a gig, you've had a meet and greet, you've met your guests, you've had and there's a lot of celebration, and and everyone's on a high, if the show was good, and you get back to the hotel and you might have had a couple of drinks after the show, and then the temptation to actually keep going. Oh, look, I might just go to the bar for one, or would I? Oh, gee, I'd love a whiskey. Oh, and then you'd get to the hotel lobby and you'd be looking over toward the bar, and then you'd be saying, no, I'm going to go back to my room and draw on one of those A4 sheets and define a little bit more about Elroy, Liam, Mitchell and Neil, and so it was a ruse to keep me out of the bar, essentially, and that's that record sleeve, just as an afterthought.
Look, if that's what it takes, but it is, again, it's a beautiful, beautiful piece of work, Nick. So well done on that. It's absolutely stunning. We'll make sure we do share it across the socials of the pod. I do want to ask very quickly. I know, as you mentioned, being on tour, I know that there's I believe some tour dates across the US in September. Look, I do have to ask for all the Australian fans listening, can we maybe at some point, not pushing for any concrete dates, but can we maybe at some point expect some shows in Australia in support of Gravity Stairs?
Oh, absolutely. I'm a little bit out of the picture here, but it clearly hasn't been announced yet. But we're doing a big Australian tour in. I'd have to look at the schedule, but I think it's. Is it after August, maybe, or September, October, November, or October, November, something like that? I mean, it'll be after the US tour, but clearly hasn't been announced yet, but probably just about to be, I would think. It makes sense that, we're going to be promoting this album. Australia's our biggest market, I would have thought, and I've seen it on the, all the things that I share with my missus, Australia, October, November, I think it is.
Look, that is very exciting. We'll make sure that those tour dates, and I imagine that they will be announced by the time that we're airing this chat. But we'll make sure all details are in there for people to find. Nick,
Cool.
we would usually ask our guests. We usually wrap up asking what they're currently listening to. Is there something at the moment that's on a high rotation for yourself?
I think, I mean, Khruangbin were one of the big records for me that I'm still touching on every now and again when I'm listening to what I relate as work music. If I'm in my studio and I'm not making music myself or working on stuff, if I'm over drawing or painting, I tend to have records that are, they work look, without even going there in terms of ambient records or whatever, but there's two records of theirs that are just really sonically the result of influence that was quite zeitgeist in the world, that kind of Cambodian, 70s, and then influenced by the dub influence of King Tubby and various Jamaican sounds. That one really turned my head, or those two records really turned my head, and I'm still listening to them. Otherwise, and I'm going to step away from this interview and think to myself, oh, why didn't you mention such and such or so and so? Because there's some great music around, but for the most part, it is jamming band stuff for me. I do love listening to the work of bands that get together in a rehearsal room and crank up the volume and just make noise together, and then eventually define it into songs or movements. And I'm very old school in that regard.
I think there is something incredible to be said, though, about Khruangbin. And as you said, it's kind of this weird, it can be used for work and for focus music. It's a fantastic kind of social music as well. It's very multi-layered, but it's, the last two records from them have been incredible. So very solid choices.
I had a dinner party this recently, and I realised.
Nick, thank you very much for coming on.
Oh, you're most welcome. It's been nice talking to you.
Sorry, I interrupted. Please.
I haven't waffled too much. I was going to say I had a dinner party the other night, and I actually put it on and realised this actually works even when you're eating. It's totally gastronomic, But look, it's been a delight talking to you. I hope I haven't waffled.
No, look, I would 100% agree. I would prefer someone to come on and have more to say than not, because we've had that as well. And for a podcast, for a recorded medium, it's very difficult. So no, please, you're welcome back anytime to kind of chat about music. But yeah, I did want to say, thank you very much for coming onto the podcast, and congratulations on Gravity Stairs, which comes out later this week. But yeah, thank you again for your time.
No problem. Been a delight. Thank you.
Never sleep hot again with Bowl and Branch's best-selling naturally cooling sheets. They feel super crisp and cool to the touch and are expertly designed for enhanced breathability so you don't overheat at night. Start getting your best night's sleep this summer with cooling sheets made with the highest quality materials. Try Bowl and Branch with a 30-night worry-free guarantee. Plus, get 15% off and free shipping on your first set of sheets at bowlandbranch.com with code BUTTERY. Exclusions apply. See site for details.